this masterclass session, The Business of Climate Services, which has been produced by InterMET.digital. If you're working on a weather or climate-related service or technology innovation, you may have considered how you could use it as the basis of a commercially viable climate service to create value for weather-affected enterprises, including those in the energy and related sectors. This masterclass session is your opportunity to find out firsthand from those who have launched successful weather and climate service businesses and from those who can provide the critical investment you'll need. I'm Jan Dutton, the CEO of Prescient Weather. I'm joined today by 4 other experts, Dr. Carlos Gaitan, the CEO and co-founder of Benchmark Labs, Dr. Karl Gutrob, the CEO of Meteor Blue AG, Simon Hombersley, the CEO of Zompla, and Alan Richards, partner and co-founder of Westhill Capital. To start the session and lay the groundwork, which will drive our discussion and enable you to formulate your questions, each panelist will give a very brief overview of the organizations and what they do. As the chair, I'll start this process and then hand the presentations over to each of my colleagues in turn. So let me load up my presentation and we'll get started. Great, so first let me introduce Prescient Weather. Prescient Weather is a small US-based climate information services company. So despite the name Prescient Weather, we really focus on climate services. We offer 2 products. One is called Crop Profit, which is a corn and soybean yield forecasting system. And it turns out in general for corn, soybeans, and many, many other crops, the amount of crop grown in any given year is dependent on the weather or the climate that occurred during the growing season. And then interestingly enough, since we're talking about climate services, the other product is called the World Climate Service. And the World Climate Service is it's an online tool set that gathers terabytes and terabytes of data all related to long-range forecasting. So it's a tool to enable better sub-seasonal and seasonal tools through dynamical forecasts, analog analysis, and statistical analysis, and then tons and tons and lots of data. And so we focus primarily on commodity traders, such as power traders, natural gas traders, and then agricultural commodities as well. So I'm going to set the stage of discussing what is a climate service. So in terms of a climate service, we can go to some other folks' sources of information. So the American Meteorological Society says that a climate service may be defined as scientifically based information and products that enhance users' knowledge and understanding about the impacts of climates on their decisions and actions. The World Meteorological Organization says a climate service is a decision aid derived from climate information that assess individuals and organizations in society to make improved ex-ante decision makers. And we could look at the WMO Global Framework on Climate Services, and there would be a similar message. So today we're talking about really the business of climate services. So I'm going to simplify these technical discussions and give my own definition of a climate service. So a climate service is a climate information-based service enabling users to manage risk and create opportunities in their own decision-making context. So again, we're talking about the business application generally, and so generally speaking, climate services are used to help make decisions, and those decisions are managing risks, or saving money, or creating opportunities to generate income somehow. And then the key, as I say here, is in their own decision-making context. So what does that mean? What does decision-making context mean? For me, it means that meteorological and climatological information is generally complicated to most people, right? So I am fortunate enough to have a background in meteorology. Some of the panelists have a background in meteorology or climatology. The language of meteorology and climatology is second nature to us. But in my experience in talking with lots of customers, people don't always understand what a deviation from normal is, or some, many of the technological terms. So the information needs to be transformed into the context the decision maker uses. A great example of that is wind speed forecasts being transformed into wind power forecasts. So the end users of wind power forecasts, they don't want to know the wind speeds. They want to know how much power their turbines are going to generate. I show an example here from Crop Profit in which we transform weather data into crop yield forecast data. So that, again, our customers that are buying and selling corn and soybean contracts or corn and soybean futures, The weather information is great for them, and many customers and many users of the information interpret weather information directly. But we're finding that our customers more and more want us to transform the data into the way that they think about the impact of climate on their business. In the case of crop profit, it is transforming the data in terms of corn yield or soybean yield, because that is what's driving the commodities markets. So what's driving demand for climate services today and in the future? One for sure is that climate variability and its impact on businesses, organizations, and people. Now, notice my second bullet point is a changing climate. So even if the climate weren't changing, climate variability would still be generating demand for climate services, because one winter is rarely like the prior winter, and next winter will be different than this winter. And so that variability is creating need to manage the impact that the variability has. There is, however, also the fact that our climate is changing, and that changing climate is changing the variability. So the statistics of extreme events are changing. There was a news article recently in the United States that all seasons are getting shorter except summer. So just the climate is changing. And so many organizations are realizing that they have climate related risks. And as the probabilities of severe and disruptive events are changing, they're becoming more interested on what that risk means for their business. So the climate, interestingly enough, is creating demand for climate services. So what's enabling new and innovative climate services? One is an ever increasing climate history. And what I mean by that is some things like every year we have another year of data to be able to process. And every day we have another day of data to process. The other, though, is that the availability of improved climate history data sets is making new Earth observation data sets available. So it seems like every week there's an announcement of a new type of Earth observation data set, whether it be weather station based or satellite data based or numerical model based. And certainly an ever increasing computational capacity is creating innovative services as well. And so what I mean by that is things like the application of machine learning is creating new analyses and new findings available that make the application of climate services more valuable. There's also, in terms of modeling capabilities, we're able to model phenomena much better than we were in the past. And some of that is related to the fact that every day we have more computing power available. And then finally, new impact data sets and open data policies. So impact data sets, for example, to go back to my crop profit example, we use as much as 40 years of corn yield and corn production history data to find the relationship between weather conditions and corn yields or soybean yields. And so new data sets are appearing every day. I was just reading on Twitter the other day a list of sites that provide information about about energy infrastructure and energy demand and energy production and publicly available data sets. And then open data policies are making more and more impact data sets together. So all of these together are allowing basically the field of data science or meteorological data science to be combined to find innovative new ways to create new climate services. And so in conclusion, I believe that the combination of a changing climate, a growing corporate awareness of climate risks, emerging analysis techniques that are fundamentally based on the evolution of computer science and computing power, and voluminous Earth observation data sets, impact data sets, and customer data sets are creating a vast set of climate service opportunities today and for many years to come. And so that's what I have to say, and I'm really looking forward to the presentations that we're going to hear as well. And so with that, I'm going to move on and introduce Dr. Carlos Gaitan. Carlos is the CEO and co-founder of Benchmark Labs. Carlos did his doctoral studies at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada, working with William C. in machine learning applications in the environmental sciences. He holds a bachelor degree in civil engineering and a master's degree in hydrosystems from Pontificia Universidad Javeriana in Bogota, Colombia. He's an elected member of the American Meteorological Society's Artificial Intelligence Committee. He has previously worked at early stage startups in the environmental science space, including the vice president of weather forecasting and head of data science at Arable Labs, as well as being a research scientist at the South Central Climate Center and and at the Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratory in Princeton, New Jersey. Carlos will focus on the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning, especially in energy generation and energy conservation. And I would just like to let everyone know, Carlos is from California, so it's 4:30 where Carlos is. So thank you very much, Carlos, for being here so early. Carlos, go ahead.
Thank you very much again for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here in this panel. Thank you, Jan, for the introduction. What I will start explaining is what we do at Benchmark and why I think that it could be beneficial or perspective to the people attending here the summer class. So Benchmark Labs was founded in 2019 after many years in academia and in other companies. And we did that because we saw that there was a need, especially for the agricultural, energy, and insurance sectors, to provide asset level information. So what we did is that we started linking IoT devices, Internet of Things, like a weather station, a pyranometer, an anemometer, in field at a specific location with information from Corsair weather models or climate models. That enabled us to provide asset-specific information. That is something that was very needed at that time. Insurance companies call the problem that they face this spatial basis risk. And basically, it happens because of the discrepancy between the information that the company has and what the farmer has or the insurer. Basically, sometimes they get information from the nearest weather station or an airport, and they could be trying to create a policy for a specific farm. It could be a wind farm, a solar farm, or an agricultural farm, and they don't have that information. So getting in-situ information is valuable for them. So using some data from the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration here in the United States, 2017 report, in my opinion, is very conservative, said that the opportunity of for weather forecasting technologies is around $4 billion of the total addressable market. But we know that data science and analytics is tenfold that time, that the size of that sector, and insurance and reinsurance is probably in the order of 24 billion of total addressable market. I will start with an example based on our experience with the Southern California Energy Innovation Network, which we are part of. They voted us in because our solution saves energy and water for California ratepayers. So we have been doing customer discovery for the past year and talking with different stakeholders. And in essence, I think that there is like a very strong potential for climate services in the solar energy forecasting, in wind energy, in water. You will see how water is related to everything, especially here in California, and to forest fires. So with the solar energy, the whole problem is that solar energy is affected by cloud cover. Cloud cover is a situation that occurs at a smaller scales. You know, it doesn't cover the whole grid that the National Weather Services generate when they create their weather or their climate models. So we can, in this case, link weather data with in-field observations of radiation and cloud cover to provide field-specific forecasts. In terms of the climate services, a similar process could be done using seasonal and subseasonal information or even climate change assessments to address, changes in cloud cover under a warming world. How would that affect the production? Given a turbine, as Jan was mentioning before, is getting the wind speed is not necessarily the output that the users want. They want generation, and for that you need to get information from a wind turbine or the proposed wind turbine that they are going to build. So it's possible to do those linkages and then project and see if a site, for example, site A is better than site B in order to allocate funds for a solar project. That's if you're looking at the climate time frame. For wind energy, it's a similar problem. Wind installations, are affected by mountains, by local vegetation, and the wind farms, sometimes they use information from gridded models. They hire meteorology consultant firms to provide those forecasts, but there is a potential to use the wind turbines as giant anemometers, for example, and then assess if a wind turbine site is going to be viable considering the lifespan and investment horizon of wind farms. Other applications related to energy, I think that based on our conversations here in California, there is a lot of potential for load balance and optimizations, energy trading, as it was referred before. Microgrid management is a new emerging trend. Before there were like the traditional electric grids designed by the states or by local companies. Now microgrid management companies are designing how to balance small operations that include sometimes solar and wind. Forest fires is huge here in California and affects, operationally speaking, labor scheduling, and it could even create blackouts here in California. So maintenance, scheduling, control burns is important. Labor scheduling and maintenance, asset acquisition, as I was saying before, identifying areas that are important, and portfolio management to address the different risks of a portfolio that could lead to different financial investments. And to end, I will just show you a project that we did with NASA last year using seasonal information to forecast the fire index, or based on the KBDI, or there is a drought index forecast that basically tells how likely are the conditions to have a forest fire. And this is a project that got a good reception in the energy industry, especially because they could look far ahead enough that they could understand that they need to do more control fires, especially in the face of COVID, where the future was uncertain. So thank you very much. This is what I have to show. We are Benchmark Labs. Thank you for the invitation. Contact us for more questions.
Thanks, Carlos. We'll be returning to some of the great points you raised later on, but now let me introduce you to Karl Gutrob. Karl is the CEO of Meteor Blue AG, a Swiss meteorology data provider founded in 2006 as a spin-off from the University of Basel in Switzerland. Karl came to Meteor Blue with 25 years of experience in international agribusiness as a project and unit leader in development, product management, marketing, business development, and information services. Karl has worked for GTZ, DED, SIBA, Novartis, and Syngenta. He has lived and worked in Germany, Switzerland, the United States, Brazil, Thailand, China, and other places. He holds a PhD in agronomy from the University of Göttingen in Germany. And I'm going to go off script for a moment and just say, if you have a chance, you should look at the Meteor Blue website. It is a really impressive website in terms of the free content that they provide. And if you're a meteorologist by background, it's a really fun site to visit. And so I've greatly enjoyed the website. It's a great example of what can be done in today's world. So in addition to his day job, he teaches courses at the University of Cooperative Education in Lörrach, Germany, and supervises bachelor degree students there in the subjects of decision theory, innovation management, marketing, and international business strategy. In 2018, Karl joined the board of the directors of InterMET, a pan-European trade association for meteorological service providers operating in the private sector. Karl, please, can't wait to hear what you have to say. Please go ahead.
Well, it's been so kind, Jan, that I almost have nothing to say anymore.
Sorry about that.
Obrigado, muchas gracias, Khop khun krap, arigato gozaimasu. It's a pleasure to be here with the many nations around. And as I realize, I'm the old guy here, which is amazing. So I didn't expect that to be, but it's good to see that the weather business is so dynamic. And I do actually also notice that our company is the oldest one on the pitch. We're 2006. That's amazing. Yeah. You've seen some very good examples of established companies or new companies in the weather business and what the weather business is about. I'm going to try to walk you through what it takes to start and run such a business. And it is, I'm going to use some examples from Meteor Blue, but I'm also going to go very broad on what country you're in, market segments, what core competencies you have, and to some extent also whom you have to work with. So it's a little bit of a sort of a panoramic view on the weather business sector. You've already heard about Meteor Blue. We have a great website which displays a lot of data that came out of a university project which was running weather models. And that is very important in Switzerland because we have lots of mountains. And if you're on the one or the other side of the mountain, the weather changes enormously. And that can kill people if you're hiking up and skiing down glaciers, if you're on the wrong side. So it is very dear to the and very important to some of the economic sectors of Switzerland. So there's a very high interest and a very high need for precision weather data. So we started with high resolution modeling. And actually the funny story is that this started inside the university and the website was established with those models inside the university, which soon got more clicks than the canteen menu. And by the time you beat the university canteen menu, you know you have a commercial project. So that's kind of triggered the drive to make this company independent. It was a long journey till we got to the stages which Jan was referring to in that nice website. We have now about customers in more than 50 countries, and we do have a data supply business as well. So you can think of Meteor Blue as being like a restaurant. So you can eat on our website, but you can also, as a commercial customer, go to our kitchen and get catering. So that's the business to business part, where you can directly extract data from our systems for your own services. And in fact, many of our customers are businesses who are also in the weather business, transforming those weather data into, like Jan was mentioning, wind energy data or agricultural data or forecasts and other such alike. So this is roughly us, and you can think of us as a big data machine for weather with global coverage, very long time range. You can get 40 years like on a fingertip and high precision. So what does it take to create such a company? And I will walk you into a little bit of market research now and sort of go back to the very origins of the weather business, which is actually state monopoly. If you look at weather 50 or 200 years ago, the first meteorological services which originated were state-run, and they served either the military or the local transport, and such as railways and roads. And they were created as state businesses. So there was no such thing as the private businesses you see today in this discussion. And it was also not very easy to run private businesses, because just gathering the data from a station network around, let's say, across 1,000 kilometers without having internet was a real coordination effort. So you had to get everybody out at noon, recording the precipitation and the temperature and the wind speed. And you had to make sure these people also worked on Sundays. So, and that they were really recording the truth. There's a nice story from South Africa that a researcher there was always recording rainfall once every 2 or 3 months until he went on retirement, and then He told people that there was actually never rainfall in that place, but he thought he had to record some because otherwise they would cut his job. And so that tells you the discipline level you have to run such an organization. And so traditionally weather services are government business. Now, today you still have states where the government is running the show. So if you don't get a government approval in China or Kenya and some other countries, you won't be able to open a weather business. They'll come to your door and shut you down. There's the second type of markets you have is markets which came from that phase, but there's still a very strong national weather service who is either very established with customers or who also has many regulations and restrict your freedom to operate. And that is the case still even in some European countries where that weather service is either very dominant or the regulations are very strict. So running private businesses is not so easy. The third type is countries where the weather service is rather open. They have actually pulled back from most of the business activities. They still classically still do some air traffic support or shipping or sea forecasting support, but they allow space for private companies to operate, and they support them also with open data, which makes it easy. That's the big data sets Jan was talking about in the beginning. And last but not least, there are some countries, and there are not so many actually, who have where the National Weather Service has totally pulled back from any business activities. They put all these huge data sets on a big smorgasbord. It's the all-you-can-eat buffet. And then companies such as ours go there and start to load these data and transform them into the language of the customer. So when you are starting a weather business, this is the first thing you have to check, because if you're in the zoo number 2 or number 1, your life is going to be very difficult. You have to overcome all these restrictions first in order to even be able to run a business. If you're in type 3 or 4, it's much easier to start a business. The only problem you might have is there's a lot of competitors already out there. So you have to think about what you're going to do. And this is another thing another look at the market which you should be familiar with. It's the so-called value chain concept. What you do to produce a useful weather service. This is a bit like producing pizza. You start, of course, with grain and tomatoes, but you end up having to bake it. And if you cannot put it on a plate or into a box and serve it to somebody, then you don't have a business. And in the weather business, that usually starts with some instruments and the supply, whether that is sensors, networks, transmitters, computers. It doesn't matter. Of course, they also need it for cars and houses, but it's mainly about the meteorology equipment. The next step is then to establish networks for those instruments which measure and deliver such data. And that's a big effort. And it's one of the most expensive parts of the weather value chain to run, and it's classically still done mostly by national weather services. There are some private networks out there, and if you want to run or set up a network, you have to figure out gaps which are not yet covered by these established networks or competitive advantage in terms of technology for you to actually supply better data. Then the next step is the data transfer, because you need to collect and process all that stuff. And measurement data collection, QC, storage, and retrieval, numerical weather prediction are part of those, and some climate models too. And then finally, you move into that's when the pizza actually starts to smoke, when you've got something edible, which is the products which are generated, official warnings, websites, apps, data, APIs, FTP services, etc., warnings, SMSs. That's where you actually start to get consumable product which your customers will buy. And last but not least, then you've got services who integrate that also. So you're no longer in the weather business, you're in the energy business doing what Carlos was explaining, or in the transportation, aircraft, insurance business, sometimes even companies within other companies like insurance, meteorology departments within insurances, who then transform those weather data into the real applications. So when you're thinking about your business, you've got to sort of locate yourself somewhere and provide something which is valued on that value chain step. Now, what does it take to get there? So mostly you will be thinking about these three segments because the other segments are really very, very, let's say, high investment and competitive to enter. Most of the growth is happening in these three upper value chain levels. So you're thinking, you found your niche, your country is okay. So what do you need to actually get started? And what you really need to figure out is, what are you better at? And I will use an American expression, of course. If you want to play basketball, you should be somebody like Michael Jordan. If you want to play baseball, that may fit, but you're actually probably not going to be very successful. And Michael tried, and he sort of had fun, but I don't think he ever got to the stage where he really became very successful. So the same concept exists in business. You've got to figure out, where are you really good, or where do you have a chance to become really good? And that concept of is called core competency. And what you need to do is think about, what's your customer benefit? What is your customer going to get out of this? Initially, this sounds very easy. It's not so complicated. It's not so easy. Carlos was speaking about customer journeys or customer interviews or integration. That's one process you can use to actually find out what your customer really needs. You've got to somehow be unique in the marketplace. If there's already 5 kids on the block doing your kind of service, it's kind of difficult to be the 6th one. You may, but then who's going to want to buy from you? Unless you're substantially better, substantially cheaper, or substantially prettier. And pretty doesn't really count too much in that in this market. You've got to be difficult to imitate, because even if you're so super good and your customers start coming and running, flocking to you, if somebody else figures out that you're making a lot of money, they will copy you. So you've got to have something which is not so easy to copy, because otherwise it'll be a commodity very soon. And ideally, you should be able to apply that technology to other products. We gave you an example of Meteor Blue. We produce high resolution model data for the entire world. We can apply that to websites, to apps, to APIs, and also to some warning service. So it's not just one thing you can produce based on that. And Jan gave you, and Carlos gave you some other examples of technology you can apply to multiple sectors. So on the right-hand side, you see kind of a value map. You figure out what is important for your customer, and then you try to plot yourself on those 0 to 100 scale and how well you're doing. This is really important for you to do before you spend all your uncles or your investors' money. So last but not least, who do you work with? Ideally, in this business, you try to build alliances. And what that means is that you consider or work with national weather services. The national weather services give you a lot of free data, at least in some countries, in the countries type 3 and 4, which I mentioned before. And sometimes they're also interested in technology. Sometimes they're interested in development projects. You can cooperate with other private weather businesses who actually might need part of your technology or give you some market access, such as you have got great technology, but you don't have customers, and some others already do. So they may help you sell your service because it adds value to a portfolio. And last but not least, if you're in the starting range, you will want to work with academia. Maybe you come from academia because that's where the innovation is being developed. That's where you can refine your product. That's where you get new people, employees, expertise, and that will strengthen your position. So building networks is always a good thing. And so rather than fighting with the others to take away some of their pie, it's actually better to work with some of your partners and try to grow the pie. And from the past 10 years, and like Jan was already explaining, we do see growth in the weather business, so that pie is going to grow if we cooperate and generate new services. So this is really key in a growing market. And I show you one little chart just to exemplify that. That's the development of the revenue of private weather businesses just in the data management, not including instrument, not including the business integration list sector level 5 segment in Europe, just level 3 and 4 in 7 countries or 6 countries in Europe. And you can see it went up like 20% per year in the last 10 years. And that's not likely to change, like Jan was explaining. So we do see a lot of interest going forward. So you can be part of that if you understand your customer, have a unique offer, organize your shop, and survive the dry period. There is drought out there, and it also happens in companies, and that usually happens when the investor money starts pouring, starts fading, or your revenues are not coming in as quickly as you can. So you've got to be able to master that, or you have to be able to find some rain. So that's sort of a short intro into creating companies, and I hope that you have good luck when you do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karl. I'm sure your audience will have a lot of questions, and if they don't, I know I do. So now let me introduce you to Simon Humbersley. Simon is the CEO of Zampla, a Cambridge University spinout, which makes replacements for plastic from plant protein. He is a serial entrepreneur, having founded several previous businesses, making a positive impact on the environment. Simon will focus on the lessons of his experience as a serial entrepreneur and some of the key developments ahead in the clean tech industry. Simon, I'm really interested to hear what you have to say.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, I think I might be copying or echoing a lot of what Karl has just said there, because everything he says I completely agree with. But thank you very much indeed. So my name is Simon. I'm a serial clean tech entrepreneur. I have no experience in weather at all, so the rest of you will have to fill in that skills gap. But I have now founded 4 clean tech businesses, 2 out of academic partnerships and then 2 out of inventor partnerships. So I think I can talk a little bit about what it is to get that early stage and how you formulate that business and how you get that very initial stage right and get your company going. My first business was an energy efficiency player, an energy efficient compressor. A second one was a photovoltaics business that went bust. I'll talk about that if you want me to. And then I had a spin out from Oxford University, which was a valve technology, particularly focused on water leakage. And the current one is a Cambridge technology that I'll talk to you a little bit about. So my current business is called Zampla. Our mission is to reduce plastic pollution. So clean tech, but a slightly different space to yours. And our goal is to be the world leader in the replacements for plastic. And if you're thinking and kicking around your ideas about building your own business, I would make sure that you've got a couple of lines like those in your head before you start going to the outside world, so that you can explain what it is that you are and what you intend to do at that very big, ambitious level. So the questions that we're asking ourselves are the same questions that you should be asking yourselves, is what happens in 2040? What happens in 2030? What does the world look like? Not just as it is today, but as it will be, because that's what you're building your business to do. You're building it to dominate the world in the future. So in our world, we're asking ourselves what it looks like after plastic. This transition is already underway. We're seeing major global brands commit to give up plastic, and there's a huge opportunity there. These are very large markets. So that's the question we're asking ourselves, is how do we take advantage of that? Where is the opportunity in that essentially mega trend that we are a part of? So that's what we're thinking about, but they've just got 3 things to leave with you when you're kicking around building your own business. And the first is that anything in our space is inherently political. So even if you're not building a business where political risk is particularly relevant, and I would advise you never to build a business that depends on governments doing anything they say they're going to do, nonetheless, there are major sort of political elements to everything we do. And regulation generally is a very positive thing in our space. Even when in my space in plastics, there's a lot of regulation in order to even out the price point, because replacements for plastics generally are more expensive. Even in areas where price isn't an issue, regulation is inherently a part of our operating environment. And it's very important you understand what your place is in that regulatory environment and where those regulations are going to change. And more importantly, if the world is not shaped in the way that suits your business, you need to work out who to work with to shape the world to suit your business, whether that's pressure groups, whether that's governments, whether it's your peers and fellow businesses. You can shape the environment in which you operate. The second one, which is relevant even to you with your rarefied high science climate world, is that consumers ultimately are the people who pay for everything. So you may think that you're selling to an insurance company, but the insurance company is selling, it's to its customers. So you need to work out where your consumers are as well as where customers are. Your customers may not be consumers. Generally, they're not going to be consumers, but they are important to you in some way. And the nature of this business is very high profile at the moment. So it is a very good time to be building businesses in this space. And the third one that you really need to think about is where you fit in that value chain. And Karl talked a little bit about this, so I'm not going to repeat it too much, but we really do need to understand where the pain is in any industry that we are seeking to solve when we start a business. Now, Alan, I will come up next, and I'm not going to talk about the investment side, but I can tell you, I wouldn't dare pitch a business to Alan until I was able to articulate very clearly what is the problem I'm solving and how much is the pain that customer feels. What's it worth to that customer to solve that problem? So I would urge you all in thinking about forming your businesses and your services is to get right to the nub of that very basic question. What is the actual pain point? And who is going to pay to solve it? Because some of the value chains that you're looking at will be quite complex, and you're working in an existing world with existing players. So you need to be very precise and understand what problem you're trying to solve. So that's all I'm going to say. Just a bit about Xampler. So we're a University of Cambridge spin out. Our material is actually a plant protein, an engineered plant protein. Nobody in the world is making plastics out of plant proteins. We're the UK's first spin out to become a B Corp. So we're an ethical mission-led business, and we're backed by some very large investors. And our chair is actually the former Chief Sustainability Officer of Unilever. So we believe we're quite well placed to solve our problem. And the problem we think we're solving is that plastic is not going to exist in the form it does in 20 years' time. And companies like Unilever really want to carry on using plastic and are prepared to pay to continue to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. That was very interesting. And I've no doubt that your experience has given our audience a lot to think about. Before we introduce to the folks listening in, Alan is providing the last presentation. And so after this presentation, we're going to move to question and answer and hopefully an open discussion. And I will encourage everyone at this point to start thinking about your questions. And you can use the chat feature in Zoom to start placing your questions there. And hopefully we'll get to all questions. But let's start with questions now. Great. So Alan Richards has more than 30 years experience in investment analysis, corporate finance, and venture capital with companies including Barclays, HSBC, and Maple Securities before co-founding Westhill in 2003. So interestingly, Karl, that's before your company, but Alan is funding the companies, though he's not necessarily a weather information company. Westhill invests around £60 million annually in early stage companies across a range of sectors, including software, digital platforms, fintech, clean tech, med tech, and bioindustrial. And so again, for those listening in, Alan represents the sector of the economy that invests in small businesses to help small companies with big ideas become big companies with big ideas. So Alan, please take the floor.
Thank you, Jan. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. First, a few words about Westhill Capital, which has raised about £300 million for 36 early stage companies in 110 rounds since 2014. And this year in 2021, we expect to raise about 100 million. We've been busy throughout the pandemic. We focus on technology companies and source deals from the networks of the partners, including university spin-outs, corporate incubators, and known entrepreneurs. And we invest at seed, and all the growth stages. We syndicate each investment with investors from our 1,000 strong high net worth clients. Most investments qualify for the UK's enterprise investment scheme, which gives various tax reliefs to private investors. We've achieved 6 exits to date. Most recently, that was the sale of a Danish software company called Humio, which was sold for $400 million to NASDAQ-listed CrowdStrike Holdings. Now, raising capital is hard work, and venture capital investors are very selective. Successful entrepreneurs might spend 50% of their time raising capital. And as soon as the ink is dry on one round of documents, they're preparing the pitch deck for the next one. So how do you prepare yourself for this marathon? What are investors looking for? And will they even invest in a weather business? Well, fortunately, the business of weather is large and growing, as we've heard. And that's 2 boxes ticked for investors. The financial database PitchBook tracks 1,800 companies in the climate technology vertical, which includes energy, agriculture, and transportation. PitchBook estimates that this market is worth $2.6 billion in 2021, growing at an annual rate of 9.5%. If we look at weather forecasting systems, Research and Markets estimates a market of $5.5 billion annually by 2027. And that's also growing at around 9% per annum. Furthermore, venture capital firms have been investing in weather businesses. If we take the period 2016 to 2021, PitchBook has tracked a total investment of $780 million in weather forecasting and weather information businesses. And that's covering 97 companies and over 300 investors in those deals. There have been a total of 217 deals in that same period. That's about 3 every month. And the median deal size is around $1 million, averaged over all the investment stages, from incubator, angel, seed, early stage, and late stage. And while it's the big deals that attract the news headlines, you can see that investors are backing startups and smaller companies. About half the investment money goes into later stage deals. That's the light green color on the graphs on the right-hand side. But by number of deals, these are only about 1/7. That's 30 out of the 217 tracked here. So VCs are backing innovative weather businesses. But what are they looking for in a prospective investment? They'll be looking to invest in businesses which scale rapidly, preferably globally. And that usually means products and software platforms, data, not professional services or consulting. They're looking for a deep moat to protect from competition. And that means patents, computer code, and technical know-how. They love recurring revenue models, so that's subscriptions and software as a service. And they're looking for a clear route to exit to get their money back with a return. And most VCs will have identified some kind of exit even before writing out the investment check. And the VC firms' investors will expect to make a return net of fees of about 3 to 4 times their committed capital over the lifetime of the fund. And to achieve that, and recognizing that some investments fail completely and return zero, the VC firm will be targeting returns from portfolio companies of around 10 times over 5 years. That's an annual growth rate of about 60%. Now, the best venture capital firms bring more to the table than just capital. You'll be joining a portfolio of other investee companies that you might be able to learn from or even trade with. You'll be given help to hire the best talent. You'll be advised by seasoned industry veterans. You'll get assistance to enter into new geographic markets, to increase sales and marketing. And finally, you'll be on the radar of other investors who might co-invest in your next round, and on the radar of strategic acquirers looking to buy your business, and also on the radar of Wall Street bankers looking for the next hot IPO. Here are a few of the investments made by venture capital firms in weather businesses over the last year, in the USA, in Europe, and in Asia. The most high profile of these is Spire, which raised $245 million from Tiger Global and other investors, and listed on the New York Stock Exchange in August, and has a current valuation of about $2 billion. Climacell has been rebranded Tomorrow.io, and that raised $77 million from Stonecourt Capital, valuing the business at more than $300 million. Climavision, which according to PitchBook was founded only in 2020, and has already raised $100 million from the Rise Fund, advised by Goldman Sachs. And the one at the top there, Ignitia, which is offering hyperlocal weather forecasts to African farmers, very recently raised $4.2 million from Novastar Ventures. Thanks for listening, and good luck with your business. Now I'm handing back to Jan.
Alan, thank you very much for your presentation. There's some very interesting statistics there around the growth of the weather industry and current venture capital activity regarding climate tech, for sure, for anyone hoping to raise funds to start a business. So that wraps up our introductory presentations. And I've seen a few questions come in on the chat feature, so we're going to dive into a few of those. And so at this point, we open the conversation, and I'll be distributing questions to the panelists, and hopefully we'll have a great conversation. Right. So one question asked by Andre is, do you think venture capital funding is essential to build and grow climate services businesses, or can you grow organically? So this is, I have to say, this is a pretty interesting question, in part because I know Carlos has had experience with both sides of the coin. Karl has probably had experience with both sides of that question. And I've had experience with both sides of that question as well. So I'll start off just by saying that in my experience, it certainly is possible to grow a business, to grow organically. In the United States, we call it bootstrapping, right? Which is that you pull your boots up by the straps and you get started in working on the business. There are some, what's the right phrase? There are opportunity costs to not seeking venture capital. And so, for example, one of the challenges I experience in the weather and climate business, I like to say, is that everything is ultimately recreatable. So as Karl did discuss, there's an awful lot of data made available by various national weather services and organizations around the world. And as Alan said, when he looks for an investor, when he looks in an investment, they're looking for some moat, right? They're looking for some intellectual capital or intellectual property that is very hard for someone to recreate. That is very difficult to do in this industry. It's possible, but it's difficult to do. And so the challenge of not seeking venture capital is basically everything goes slower, and you run the risk that a competitor comes up with the same idea or recreates what you're doing and then does it better and faster than you do because they've got venture capital and they can focus better on marketing and sales and on technology and things like that. So it certainly is possible, but you have to weigh the strengths and the weaknesses of whatever strategy you might want to employ. And I guess Karl or Carlos, do one of you want to comment as well?
Yeah, I can start because I've got the unmute button faster than the others. I think it essentially is a yes-no. If you're trying to take a yes-no decision, the criteria will be, do you have a technology which you think will scale? Or do you have a service which you believe is global and you need to accelerate growth? And then you need capital, because waiting for this to happen is going to take too long. And once you have made that decision, it's like Alan was saying, you've got to, first of all, spend a lot of time to actually get those funds. And then you've got to actually grow very fast, because your investors will expect from you that you do produce very high returns. So it's what I call, it's Pink Floyd already published that strategy 40 years ago. It's called Run Like Hell. You've got to be fast if you embark on that strategy. And you've got to, in the beginning, already be able to, from the management point of view, invest. I've heard figures from 25 to 50% of your time to actually raise that capital. In other words, if you're embarking on getting venture capital, you better have your business run by itself without yourself as management for 50% of the time. Otherwise, what can happen is that you're looking for capital, and in the meantime, your business starts to stumble. And by the time you've got the capital, you can't deliver. So that's sort of the catch-22 on the whole thing in a nutshell.
Great. Carlos?
Yeah, thank you. Great take, Karl and Jan. From my perspective, I think that as a founder, first you have to answer the question what you want to do, how you envision yourself in the future, and what kind of climate service company would you want to do. Is your goal to have an IPO? Is your goal to have venture capital funds and maybe lose the control of your company? It's perfectly fine, but you have to, there are different ways that you can scale it. We have been blessed that we got support from the National Science Foundation, from NOAA and other grants here at the state level. We also have private investors. But as Karl says, with venture money, it comes greater expectations of the speed that is expected, that the business will scale, and fundraising will become a substantially significant part of your daily life. Talking with investors, holding hands with your group, and then developing product. You have to be ready to scale. And so I guess that it's more a question for each one of the participants, because there are like lots of opportunities to work in the climate sector, being consultants, providers, very profitable business in the range of $1 million, $5 million annual recurring revenue that doesn't have to have VC money. So it's up to what each person will want to do. Thank you.
Alan, I have a question for you. In your role of evaluating companies for investment, have you ever talked to anyone out of seeking venture capital?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I mean, Westhill is really a hybrid. We're not a pure VC firm, and we're not just a placement agent. We are looking for great companies. The partners generally invest alongside of the investors. So normally I wouldn't promote anything unless I was happy to invest in it myself. The VCs can be hard taskmasters, and as other commentators have said, you've got to be able to run your business and achieve the returns that they're looking for. And, you know, part of that job of a VC is sometimes replace the management team, which is a very difficult thing to do. But obviously, it means that sometimes founders have to step aside, hopefully with some capital built up. But sometimes they need to hand over to the next generation of management. So look, if you've got a perfect business which is generating sufficient free cash flow to fund your investment needs, then you don't need outside investors. So that's the perfect business. I don't think many of those exist. Also, VCs don't just put new money into the company. They will, you know, buy out existing shareholders. So sometimes, you know, founders need to raise a bit of capital themselves before exit, you know, for their daily lives. So I think external investors or VCs can come in helpful there.
Great, great. And then Simon, a question for you. So you mentioned that you, as a serial entrepreneur, you've started 4 different companies. How did you evaluate the bootstrap versus venture capital decision?
I think Carlos is right. You know, starting a business is a very personal thing, and you need to know what you personally want. It's perfectly acceptable to create a business that supports you and your family and a small team and not seek to scale it. That may be a valid option. In my world, which is generally quite a tech-heavy world, it's not an option. We need investment and resource to get to scale. What I would say, though, is you do need to think about what your customers want to buy from. And if you've got a major business, they don't actually want to be dealing with very, very small, undercapitalized and unprofessional businesses. They want a sophisticated sales team. They want to know you're going to be in business in 5 years' time and that what you say can follow through in a professional way. So I think sometimes people not seeking to scale their business actually start to damage their own prospects. I think we all should be trying to be the best we can be. And if that requires getting investment in from outside, great, go for it.
Yeah. I'll close this out just by giving an example. So the Prescient Weather, the company that I run, I've been at the company for 3.5 or 4 years now. It was started in 2009, and we are purely a bootstrap company so far. And as Carlos and Simon sort of alluded to, we have made a decision, at least up till now, that we don't want to seek investment. And to be perfectly honest, it's partially a lifestyle play. As Alan said, venture capitalists can be tough taskmasters. And, you know, we don't really want to work 16 hours a day to make sure we're reaching the goals that we have to reach. The compensation we've made for that is we remain very narrowly focused on our core market, which is supporting commodity traders, essentially. And so we're not trying to serve 4, 5, 6, 7 different markets in an effort to grow. We're staying very narrowly focused, making sure we understand our customers and making sure that we provide what they want in that space. So there's always trade-offs that you have to make. And it can, as Simon said, it can only be made at the individual level. Or at the founders level who may be seeking startup funding. I'm going to go to another question from Andre. So Andre, you're asking great questions. Andre asks, how do you get large companies that may be quite conservative interested in new climate and weather services? So basically, I mentioned that there's lots of innovation going on in the development of climate services, but how do you get companies to buy into that? Into the concept that you're trying to develop or trying to sell. And so I will start off again by saying, from my perception, generally speaking, if you can define a return on investment for the fees that they will pay you for your service, you know, 8 out of 10 times a company will probably purchase your service. So the point is that what I like to say when I think about sort of marketing our services is any business opportunity comes down to one of 2 things for a customer. You're either saving them time or you're saving them money or you're making them money, right? So saving time, saving money. And so when you look at the return on investment of the fees that a company will pay you, you have to figure out how you're saving them time or saving them money. And if you can do that, you're making your first step towards getting large companies interested in new climate and weather services. And I guess, Carlos, let me ask you, you're at a fairly early stage company at this point. What kind of work are you doing to convince customers that your innovative new services is worth paying for?
Yeah, thank you. Great question, Andre and Jan. So yeah, you nail it. Like, you save time, you save money, you provide a value added. It's not necessarily a vanity metric, but what's the return on investment for their organization? So you can start to go back to Andre's point. Bigger organizations do not move as fast as startups. So that also comes with a certain level of risk. If you are a small company, you want to partner with a big organization, because for them, going back to you in 6 months is fast. For you, you could run out of money. So there comes risk associated with that. But for example, we recently were accepted into Techstars. There's a national, renowned accelerator program in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy voted us in, saw the value of our solutions, and you start developing the relationship, see the value proposition, and you can create pilots. The pilots, you have to find that champion inside of the organization, and that's probably one of the best recommendations. You have to identify who is going to go to bat for your solution, and we'll push to work with you to get a pilot, then sign a contract, expand the contract inside of each organization. So figure it out when you do the business model canvas activity later on, who is your target champion in each organization. And that's probably the way that you have to start thinking about the business.
And let me add one little point, because I worked in a large company for many years. Later, what Carlos said is really perhaps even the bigger challenge, because large companies sometimes don't even let you find the person who actually makes decisions on the services that you are, or we are going to offer. And in the practical world, Meteor Blue started a website just to be known. So people from larger companies actually see what we do and they get interested. And there's other ways to do that, which we will not expand because we have other questions. But I would just want to add one other aspect. Think about what your core competence are. If you're building satellites, then you better search for large customers, because you need a few very, very large customers to be able to pay for your investment and to market the services thereof. If you have small, if your company is smaller, have large, like IoT sensors and stuff like that, it may be difficult, because if you have one large customer and you think that you've got them, and that customer drops, you're dead. It's called risk lump. So if your technology and your customer market is composed of multiple potential revenue streams, try to diversify your risk and not just hope that the big company will be your future sort of milk cow or whatever you call it. Do that only if there is a good business case, or if you actually need them and if you actually make a big difference to their business.
Karl, I think that's a very interesting comment, in part because one of the things I've seen in the US weather industry and climate industry is there are companies that start by providing services to only one company, which is to say let's say that they were in school, an individual was in school and they developed a really neat new forecasting capability or something. And in conjunction with developing it while at school, they were working with a company to understand the value of it. And then when they leave school, they start a company, and their first customer is the company that they were working with. And which is to say, back to the original, one of the earlier questions is, that is one way of starting a business without having to seek investment, is you get a very good first customer. And then you have to once you get your first customer, you got to get your second customer, and you get your third customer. And so, but you do run the risk of revenue concentration in a very few number of customers for sure. But again, that's one way of, let's say, avoiding funds at the very early stage is if you can arrange it, have a first customer in mind when you start the business. Let's turn, there's a few questions here that are related to what I would call the public-private partnership space, which Karl, you touched on a little bit. There's a question here that says, suppose we are a national Met service. We have a large amount of climate data and experts, but we lack IT experts and a platform to make data available to the public and companies. Is there a place for public-private cooperation? Interestingly, well, as we've been doing, I can start as well.
Great.
So I've had some experiences in trying to work with national Met services around the world in different places and trying to develop partnerships to commercialize our platform, maybe with proprietary data. And my experience has been it's very difficult to do because of let's call it the institutional momentum of a national meteorological service within their country. I would say that understand that most companies, and certainly the companies that are here, that we want to develop subscription services, which is to say, because of what Alan said, which is that recurring revenue is a subscription service. So, right, you pay year in, year out, hopefully. But certainly I would say that there are always going to be opportunities for public-private cooperation if unique data can be shared that solves unique problems and revenue can be generated from it. The complications are probably working through the logistics of working out the details of the partnership. Karl?
Yeah, this is a broad subject, but there's a few simple lines along it. I think the question, in a way it was posed, is that there is a National Weather Service with lots of data and experts, and they need some expertise to create IT and platform. And there is, if that is the only ambition of the National Weather Service, to improve the delivery of the data to the public, there's certainly space for public-private partnership. In fact, private companies are much better at making data available to a large range of audience simply because they have to do that efficiently every day. National services by nature are not good at that because they have to maintain an infrastructure. And so in the simple world where open data is, let's say, of interest, the private services can help national businesses. There may be cases where private services can also help national services. If you talk about some downstream specific customer, let's say their own disaster management services, perhaps not in the US, that's a very developed market, but in other markets, or road management or forest fires, etc. There's certainly opportunity for the private sector to help. And I will try to illustrate that with a very simple analogy. If you are trying to make your product fit for a customer, you always have to be flexible. You have to adapt. You have to follow your customer. You have to make it cheaper or make it better or make it different. So you're always trying to improve. If you're trying to do that as a National Weather Services, you're starting to run into very dangerous territory because you're starting to maybe change your temperature measurements or your precipitation records or your radiation or cloud assessments. And changing those data is not such a good idea. Just think about climate change, and we're measuring 1.5 degrees difference. Can you imagine what would have happened to these data series if people had been flexible in adopting new technologies without taking care of continuity? So you have to have a certain stubbornness, if you may call it in a negative sense, to administer such data sets over a long period of time. And that's contradictory to private business. So, and the best example of private business is trying to adjust to customer demand is Volkswagen diesel scandal. If you have a technical problem, let's just adjust the method of measuring and we'll be done. That's what private businesses do if you don't give them very, very clear guidelines. So coming back to the original state, generating data, solid-based data, and reliable sets, or also second business example, huge investments such as in satellite or radar networks. That's only states can do that. Private businesses cannot do that. But making them actually custom fit, that's what private businesses are much better at. And that's where the partnership opportunities are.
Let me just ask anyone else on the panel.
Yeah, sure, Jan. Thank you. To answer Melita's question, I think that there is also an opportunity if you are in this position that you want support and also increase the public-private partnerships to talk with, from the perspective of a national weather service, talk with Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud. For example, here in the United States, they sign an agreement with the government, and now many data sets, publicly available data sets, are freely accessible in Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, and Amazon and Microsoft Azure. We know that ECMWF data from Europe is also hosted in AWS. So I foresee that if you are in a position where you lack IT experts or the platform to make that data available, contacting one kind of these cloud providers could help you, because it's in their best interest to host your data, because they charge all the other users when they access the data through their platform. So I think that it's a very clear case where you will win, because the data will become accessible and maybe they will clean it and pre-process it for you, and they will monetize the accessing of the data. Thank you.
That actually then also relates to an earlier question asked by Melita, which is, what are the benefits for national Met services in cooperation with private companies? So she goes on to say, especially if the country is mostly monopolistic in climate and weather activities, how can we move towards more open cooperation? I guess, again, I'll say I think Karl gave an example of where there may be benefits to the National Met Service. So again, my individual view is that there is an opportunity for cooperations with the private sector and the National Met Service to modernize the delivery technologies that a National Met Service might bring to either their people or their stakeholders. And the reason I say that is, at least I would say in the United States and secondarily Europe, right? Those are the two most competitive commercial weather and climate information service markets in the world. And as a result, because we're all competing, we're always trying to be better than our competitors. And we're investing in technologies. We're trying to make our products, always better. And my experience has been that national meteorological services simply do not have that incentive. And that the technology available from the private sector is incredible. There are platforms that could be integrated or could be used to enhance services provided to the citizenry or the stakeholders of individual countries. The challenge will be that, again, as a service provider, I want to be able to offer global solutions, right? So that I can have scale eventually, so I can raise money from Alan, as an example. So I can give a very specific example of a potential benefit, and I'm going to use the World Climate Service as an example. So the World Climate Service integrates sub-seasonal forecasts from 4 different operational models. It integrates seasonal forecast information from 8 different climate models from different sources. We're processing a wide range of data, and we do it all in the cloud. And so I know that the sub-seasonal and the seasonal forecast information is being positioned as one opportunity for climate adaptation and climate mitigation, which is to say, if you know earlier that severe and disruptive conditions are possible to develop, you can respond to those better. And there's a lot of work being done at the national government and the WMO level to enable countries with this type of information. Meanwhile, we've been competing with our competitors, and we have an awesome technology platform that I'm sure could serve a similar role. And I'm sure that we can do it cheaper. So an example of a benefit for cooperation of a private company would be to have access to industry-leading long-range forecasting information with literally a username and a password. And then we do all of the work and we just make data available and data available for forecasters as well. And I think there's just a huge number of opportunities like that that could occur if there were openness to partner with the private sector. Go ahead, Karl.
Let me add to that. This is not such a, it's not a capital, it's really a bit of a technical discussion. And Jan, you've already explained that some of the services, they may come from outside the country if they are not provided within the country. That's sort of the go to the neighbor and attack from there, if you like, strategy. It's perhaps not always the best. The National Weather Services sometimes don't like it, but it produces a little bit of competition. So that is one way, if you're really focused on trying to solve one of your national problems and it is important to you and to your country, your country won't help. That is a way to do it, and it's already happening. Yeah. The second way to do it is, and I'm sorry that I'm on recording, but I will still say, is you don't provide a weather service, you provide something packaged. You package the weather and you provide a agricultural service. So it's no longer weather, so you're not falling under the monopoly. The third is trying to convince your National Weather Service, and eventually a combination of these three strategies will actually soften them, because I don't think we will be discussing about monopolies in 10 or 20 years from now, because everybody will notice that this is the worst economic approach. So it will just take longer in some countries than it will in others.
Question for Simon. Simon, in your space that you're working in now, I can imagine that governments may get involved in the form of regulation or, as you mentioned, subsidization. And so what we're talking about here is that in the weather and climate industry, there's an awful lot of freely available data available from different government agencies around the world. And that freely available data is somehow, there's value added to it to provide a service to an end user. I'm wondering, in your space, is there a similar role within say, private sector for plastic replacements to work with governments to try to improve the market for the product that you're offering?
I think it's a slightly complicated place there. I mean, I think that the analogy there with the climate space from our world is around systems approaches to addressing pollution, where inevitably there do have to be different stakeholders working together. But for us, from a sort of plastics point of view, I'm not sure there is that much there. I think one of the issues that we have in our world is that people don't know yet that there are solutions out there. So governments are still setting up regulatory frameworks, assuming that there is no replacement for plastic, whereas actually there are a couple of hundred companies around the world working on replacements for plastics. It's just the fossil fuel industry funds governments, and therefore there's a certain sort of partisan approach to this. So no, but thank you, Jan, for trying to stretch it to bring my world of plastics into your weather.
You actually raise an interesting point that I experience, which is that many times customers don't know what to ask for because they don't know something exists. Yeah. Right. And that is, and so that gets back to the question of how do you get large companies to try a service? Like, you got to make sure they know about it first.
And I think Carlos picked up on this is around finding your advocate. But what I would say in that is large companies, generally the people who take decisions in large companies have a very different risk profile from the people on this meeting, all of whom are thinking about starting their own companies. So there is, we can get quite frustrated because we've got a great idea that we know can fix their problem, and they won't take it. So the solution there is actually to remember that a big company is not ever one decision maker. What you've got to do is you've got to find your champion, and you've got to give them all the upside that you think you've got, and then you need to work with them to help them overcome all of the barriers inside their companies, whether it's procurement or regulation or whoever it is that wants to say no to something. You need to help that enthusiastic advocate knock down all those barriers. And it can take a while and can feel like a campaign. Selling innovative services to big companies is like a battle where you just keep on fighting every single person who says no.
Yeah, that's a good that's a good point. And I guess, Alan, I have a question for you now, which is at least two of the companies here, which is my company and then Carlos's company. We have received we've received grants from the government basically to do cutting edge research, and it ends up, in your language, it's non-dilutive support. And I'm wondering, how do you weigh like the growth of a company so far up to the point where you're going to invest in it? Is it beneficial to have outside support already, or do you prefer to see a fully bootstrapped company up to the point where you're ready to invest?
Well, soft capital, as we call it, is great, particularly for the founders and the management team, because it's not diluting them. We're often investing at stages where some soft capital has been achieved, but they are looking for further grants, and some of these grants from Horizon 2020 and Innovate UK can be very meaningful sums, but often those bodies are looking to give the grants to companies that are stable and going to be around and deliver what they're supposed to deliver. So they often want external investors involved in the companies. So very often you've got to find a third of the the project cost to match the 2/3 from the grant body. But yeah, we're invested in several companies that are still applying for those grants. So
yeah,
it's very important to get as much resource as you can from everywhere. But it does take time. I mean, there are a lot of consulting companies, selling their services to help companies go through the grant mill, because it does take time and resource. And you shouldn't underestimate that.
Let me just add straight to that from practical experience. These funds are sometimes very helpful for the reasons Alan mentioned. The difficulty is actually getting them, and that's where partnerships also help, because if you have good technology and you're working with a large already established company and they form a consortium where your technology has a role, these partners will usually pull you in and let you participate in the project. And of course, your technology will strengthen the grant, and they already understand the administration of it. So that's where partnerships really help. That's one aspect. The other one, of course, there's often national schemes which are a little bit less difficult to get, less competitive, and more focused on local players, and that also helps in the early phases. And last but not least, one of the questions asked in the chat is what benefits there may be to cooperate with National Weather Service or with some public institutions. Could be cities or local administrations as well, if it comes to weather services or airports or stuff, depending in which area you are, or local energy providers. So they would sometimes help you develop your services and give you some funding. I know several companies in our area which have business starter budgets, and that helps you get it over the dry period, as I was saying. And it also helps you sharpen the focus on the business, because they usually do represent a type of customer. So they give you some feedback on what the services, products are worth.
Great. So I'm gonna ask a question that came here from Anna, and she says, in your opinion, is there anything unique for weather and climate services businesses that may need a different or additional approach from other types of businesses? And then she lists a bunch of the traditional things required to make a business successful, such as researching the market, developing the business model, finding funding, creating your niche and stuff like that. And I think, again, my perspective is I've been for now 22 years in the weather and climate services market. And initially, if I were like 10 years ago, I'd probably say, yeah, there's probably something unique, but in the end, I think starting a business is starting a business, and there are some fundamental things that you have to do. And Karl actually covered them in his presentation. And again, is my business the same as Simon's business? They're very, very different. Are we trying to achieve at a high level the same things of, making sure we have the capital to run, making sure that we have a differentiated offer relative to competition, making sure that we understand our customers? Those elements are all the same. And what we have to do is mold the plan to the very specifics of the market that we're going to participate in. But at a very high level, I think those are all, I think running a business is running a business. You just have to understand the specifics of likely how to be successful. Go ahead, Karl.
Since you mentioned my presentation, I will just add to that. You've got to do the usual stuff. That's obvious. And but I read a book about business models, and there was 55 business models in there. So you can discuss about how to define them, but doing the right thing is not reading the book, is choosing the one out of the 55 or the 3 out of the 55, which may work in your context. And I will try to put this into a more practical sense. If you're making pizza, it's always the same. You make pizza at home. You can maybe make it in a restaurant. You can make it in a factory. The process is always the same, but you're not going to make pizza for deep freezing at your home. So you need a few things which are different if you're trying to sell deep freeze pizza. On the other side, you won't want to take all the care on the deep freeze pizza, which you take at home when you make it. So the process, the core process is always the same, but actually fitting it to your particular market, fitting it to your customer range and also to your capabilities. I mean, if you have no money, you can't do the factory pizza thing. You've got to then first do the small thing, which helps you to find somebody who's so excited about your pizza that they will say, we'll give you money to build a factory. So it's about doing the right thing in the context of what you are doing. And that's where the difficulty is. But don't try to reinvent the wheel. Don't believe that, like Simon was saying earlier, that the government will do what you want because they are saying they will. They won't. Don't think that the energy business will change from being a commodity business to being a service-oriented, innovative business. They won't. So try to be realistic. And that realism, trying to understand your environment, is probably the most challenging part of the process.
And if I could just pick up on Karl's riff on pizza there, because he's making me quite hungry. But I would say that starting a business is really exciting. It's a fantastic thing to do. And if you've got a great idea, I would encourage everybody to do it. But I love pizza. I wouldn't try to make pizza without having watched somebody else make pizza first, and ideally worked with somebody who's taught me how to make pizza. So, we all think that we should go out and start a business because that's an obvious thing. We all want to do it. But you can learn a lot in a year or two working for somebody else's pizza making business before you start your own. So I should think about that in the mix as well.
That is a great point, Simon. I will say I started a business right out of school, and I always tell people that I wish I knew then what I knew now, because it would have been a different outcome. And that one died a death. It died a business death.
Me too. So we both learned the same lesson.
Yeah, great. So I think we've covered an awful lot of questions, and so I'm just going to wait for a moment or two and see if there isn't another question that comes in. And so now we have only a few minutes left, so we're going to get a little bit personal. And for each of the panelists, I just want you to spend a few minutes talking about why you're doing what you're doing today, and then we will how did you get into whatever it is you're doing today? How did you get into it? And then we'll probably wrap it up from there. So let's see, Simon, why don't you go first, since you just had the floor?
Sure, no problem. Well, I mean, personally, I think that companies make change in society. and can be real dynamic actors. And I personally care quite a lot about pollution, plastic pollution in the environment. And the best way to tackle that from my point of view is not to become a politician or to work for a pressure group, is to start a business that has a solution. Simple as that.
Great. Alan.
Well, since I left university, I've always been involved in the investment business, whether it was managing funds or working as an analyst, equity analyst. And at the end of my career, I've got into venture capital. So I kind of a little bit stumbled into it, to be honest. But you know, I like finding great companies and you know, getting my friends and clients to invest in them. I suppose that's what turns me on. And you know, we're going through a golden period now where you know, the pool of money in private capital markets is absolutely huge and very diversified. So although life is becoming more complex and businesses are becoming more complex, you know, raising capital is probably easier than it's ever been. And there's lots of help out there to, you know, to help you start your business, you know, whether it's universities, you know, business degrees, or incubators, you know, corporate incubators or academic university incubators. So if you've got a great idea, join an incubator and try it out on a few people in that incubator. You might find that it's not such a great idea, and you won't have spent too much money to find out that it's not a great idea. So yeah, I mean, go for it if you've got the appetite for it.
And Alan, can I ask, are you starting to make investments in climate tech?
Well, we've looked at, yeah, we invested in a photonics business, which measures wind speed and direction. Is it called LiDAR, which sits on the nacelle of a wind turbine.
Great.
We've got an investment in a wave generator, which powers undersea instruments. We've got investments in, you know, alternative protein businesses which are using less water and less land than you know, traditional protein from agriculture and fishing. So it's really difficult to not do it, you know, because it has an impact on so many things now. The first or second question that investors are asking now is, how's your business going to get to net zero?
Yeah. Very good. All right, Carlos.
There he goes. Thank you, Jan. So from my perspective, I was always passionate about the water cycle. So I study, you know, engineering, hydrology, atmospheric sciences, and that passion led me to, you know, find ways to solve real problems. When I'm originally from Colombia, and I remember growing up that one Strong El Niño event had us studying with candlelight, because we were heavily dependent in hydropower, and that's how I started my fascination. And even after I went to the geophysical fluid dynamics lab, then I always wanted to bring research to applications. So that was also a clear indication for me that I just wanted to, you know, create a product that users will see, that will benefit real people. So that's how I ended up here.
Great. Karl?
Yeah, thank you. This is a difficult question to answer because it's a little bit more like Alan stumbled into it. And I have had 2 careers before, one in research and one in large business. And I guess the interest for weather, I was always interested in weather. I actually, this is a funny story. 3 weeks ago, we were unraveling old letters sent to my grandma and sort of which she had, of course, she's passed away already, but my mother has kept them. So we were going through the letters, and there is a letter I've sent to her when I was age 11, and I was writing, and the Christmas presents I'd like to ask for is XYZ. And by the way, the weather here is very hot. So this was interesting. I didn't know I was interested in the weather at age 11. So, but then I went into agriculture, agronomy for like 3 decades. And one of the interesting thing was in Syngenta and Novartis and previous companies that obviously the products, crop protection, chemicals, and seeds are quite dependent on weather. I mean, Jan has nicely shown that in his presentation. So, and one of the things we try to do, and I say try because we didn't really succeed, is developing services which help the users of those products make better decisions on how to use them. It's like this little slip you get when you buy drugs, when you buy pharmaceuticals, not the other drugs. And because it's 4 pages of instructions and you throw it away. And it's the same when you apply crop protection products. In the end, you need to just take one decision, but you have to read 4 pages. And with the advent of internet and all these sensing technologies, we saw that we could actually improve those decisions substantially. And today, several companies do. So the company founded a small department, and we started developing these services. But it was much too slow. And the uptake was not good, and there lots of resistance, and the company was always trying to, okay, develop something, but we don't have money, and then develop something, but it's complicated, or we have to provide services. We don't want to do that. It's just products, et cetera, et cetera. And so in the course of that project, I actually stumbled into this university project. And since I was mid-40s, and I was doing the same thing as I had been doing for half a decade, I thought that starting something new would be more exciting. And but why am I doing this? It's probably also because I had the certain interest in creating some jobs, because what I was doing was not creating jobs. And I'm living in a country which has a lot of technology and a lot of wealth, but we're very good at cutting jobs here in some of the industries. The only question is what comes if you're actually done with cutting jobs, who is left? So creating something new which has value did make some sense. And so probably a bunch of other reasons, but I can tell you it was a fun journey. And today I'm quite happy that I took the dive.
Right. Well, it's very interesting. So I'll finish by saying my father was a professor of meteorology, and as a teen, I wanted nothing to do with science or weather or anything. And so I was unlike Carlos in that nothing happened to me as a child that got me interested in weather. But somehow I ended up in graduate school in meteorology. And so I did graduate school in meteorology. I did a business degree. And when I finished school in 2000, my goal was to help companies deal with the effects of climate change. And it turns out I was about 20 years too early. But I ended up in the weather industry. And I will just say I love this industry, even though it's ridiculously competitive and sometimes hard to find success. But I can't put a finger on why, but I love this space. If you ever get a chance to see me present at a conference, you'll see that I get very excited about whatever I'm presenting. But in the end, I'm excited to help companies, manage risk, save money or save time using weather and climate information. It's very strange, but that's why I'm doing it. So we will wrap up. So today was a masterclass in starting a climate service, and hopefully those folks listening on the other side got some useful information. I know I certainly did in listening to the presentations. It was great information. We tried to address as many of the questions as we could. But unfortunately, there certainly is limited time. I know I personally am willing to connect with anyone to discuss whatever might want to be discussed. You can always find me on LinkedIn, and you can certainly find us at one of our websites as well. And so with that, we're going to wrap it up. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. And for those of you that are in the next sessions for which I'm a mentor, I look forward to speaking and meeting you. Thank you very much, everyone.